Hello, I'm Tomix. It is time again for my annual list where I talk about the best movies, shows, games, and podcasts from the past year, focusing both on the well-known ones that deserve to be celebrated and the small ones you probably haven't even heard about but should. And yes, it's February right now, but I'm not late. I just wanted to make sure that I don't miss anything. Yeah, that's plausible. I generally try to phrase things as spoiler-free as possible in case you want to try enjoying these things yourself, but I have to admit, that's been extra hard this year. Because if 2022 was the year of live action and 2023 was the year animation fought back, 2024 is the year that defies explanation, with pieces of media that simply cannot be easily summed up. It is also the year of gaming, with way more games on my list than ever before. And while shows are taking a bit of a backseat this year due to us feeling the effects of 2023's writer's strike, 2024 has been a great year for indie gaming, with way more hard hitters than I've ever had on this list before with all sorts of varying genres, so much so that I'm actually gonna split off the gaming section into its own separate video. As for everything else, here are the timestamps. For now, let's start with the shows, talking first and foremost about animation. When it comes to shows, it's undeniable that this was the year for indie, with tons of new small independent shows popping up all over the internet. And leading the parade are two shows. The Amazing Digital Circus, who got so big you can actually find it on Netflix now, despite the creators still maintaining full control of how they run their show, which is, I can't stress this enough, huge for indie shows. But hey, that's from 2023, go see that list if you want to hear me talk about that one. Our first proper entry of 2024 is the indie darling you already know about, Has-Been Hotel. If you have an internet connection, you probably already heard about this one. This show about the overly naive princess of hell opening a hotel meant to help sinners become better people started off as a little YouTube animated pilot based on a webcomic and slapped together by a group of friends. The pilot garnered so much attention that it got bought up by Amazon to be turned into a show. The show turned out to be so successful, it already had a successful spin-off before it even aired its first episode. Hell, it's so successful, it got renewed for a fourth season. We haven't even had a second one yet. That doesn't even sound like it makes sense. But there's no denying how successful and beloved Has-Been Hotel has become. This show is somewhere between a grand, moving Broadway musical, a Saturday morning cartoon you watch in your pajamas while eating cereal, and the browser history of an edgy teenager, shifting between heartwarming and sauciness with a lot more joy and style than other stuff you'd call adult animation, most of which nowadays just feels like it runs on cynicism or darkness, but Has-Been Hotel shows it doesn't have to. You can have a show aimed at adults and still be fun, heartfelt, cheerful, and goofy. Plus, it might just have the best musical score for any animated show. That's it. End of sentence. Seriously, the music! Oh my god, don't get me wrong, it still rubs me the wrong way that all the voice actors from the pilot were replaced, because I love them and they helped make this show popular enough to be bought out by Amazon in the first place, but what can I say? They replaced the entire cast with star Broadway performers who freaking kill it, with music that I probably didn't stop listening to for the entire first half of 2024, even when I wasn't watching the show, because it's just so good! Every episode has a bop! Songs with a perfect mix of energy, pizzazz, story relevance, humor, and personality make Has-Been Hotel one hell of a show. But you all already knew about it, so how about a show you've never heard of? Acorda Carlo, or Wake Up Carlo in English, is a Brazilian show from last year I only heard about for the first time this year, and boy am I glad I did. Imagine if you put in the blender Little Nemo, The Misadventures of Flapjack, Adventure Time, Over the Garden Wall, 12 Forever, and then you hit Purée. The result is something that's really hard to describe, because on the surface, it's one of those wacky, zany ADHD animated shows that bounces all over the place with lol so random humor that erratically zips around every 3 seconds before you get a grip on what's happening, and feels like it was tailored to keep toddlers glued to the screen for 10 minutes while mommy has some grown-up juice, not unlike the early seasons of Adventure Time. But when you actually spend a bit of time looking into it, the imagery it chooses, the story beat it goes through, you realize under the wacky zaniness there's actually hidden depth, qualities, and social commentary, like the later seasons of Adventure Time, or Alice in Wonderland for that matter. It doesn't drop the zany ADHD act at any point, and sometimes things really are just wacky for the sake of being wacky, but at the same time it also has a coherent linear plot with delicious amounts of subtext. Secretly one of the hardest hitters of last year, which is wild because apparently it's one of the least watched shows on Netflix. Heck, I missed it myself or it would have made last year's list. But this show is absolutely worth sitting down to watch if you want something fun, mindless, and joyful while still having those juicy undertones to analyze like most good modern animated shows do. Also, it really made me want to try Guavito, just saying. But that's last year, and if we were here talking about shows from previous years, I'd spend a whole segment telling you about how this year I learned that YOLO Crystal Fantasy, despite giving the appearance of a crass, dumb, minimal effort show for stoners, is secretly a brilliant crass, dumb, minimal effort show for stoners that, much like a drawing by Picasso, knows what a good piece of media is supposed to look like and has the ability to do that, but then decides, fuck that, I'ma do my own thing. Actually, I like it a lot more than Smiling Friends, a newer show by the same creator, for reasons that I won't get into because we're talking about 2024. And I assure you, 2024 has its fair share of other baffling successes that are very difficult to describe. Like, what the fuck is Oshinoko? I went into this anime with a recommendation to, trust me, just watch it, go in blind. And I did, and I gotta say, while that was absolutely the right call, because it was like an amusement park ride of what the fuck is this and where is it going, that any kind of synopsis would have spoiled for me, which is why I won't describe the plot for you, I did almost miss out on it because, well, to be frank, about a third of the way into watching the first episode, I actively noped out. I was like, nope, I'm done, nope, I'm not watching this. Except I was watching it with someone else and I didn't want to stop it in the middle, so I let it play on. And then it did something no other show has ever done. Completely lost me, and then it won me back all in one episode. And not only did it win me back, it became possibly my favorite show of the year. Because while this show does like to get close to that red line of too anime cringe while eyeing it seductively, anytime some creepy anime tropes happened, someone within the show would actively call them out as creepy, so I kept giving it a chance, and anytime I thought, oh no, this is it, this is the moment the show becomes unwatchable trash, the show basically hit the gas pedal, drove towards that uncomfortable trope at full speed, only to do a sharp turn and flip the car into a sick stunt in the form of impressive writing, unbelievably good animation that I had to constantly pause and study because I kept going, how the fuck did they do that? That was amazing, and some of the best directing I have ever seen in an anime. Not to mention an opening theme so good that it topped both the international Billboard and Apple Music charts. I'm talking number one. I'm not an otaku, but I was listening to that theme on my Spotify ever since I heard it. The only thing I can say about this show that wouldn't be a spoiler is that it's a show about show business in modern day, with the highs and lows and challenges that come with it. But honestly, that doesn't do the show justice. It juggles like 3 different motifs, genres, and plots at any point, but it clearly knows how to juggle, whereas any other show would drop the ball trying to handle this much everything. Oshinoko masterfully switches between them, putting on one hell of an impressive show. It's hard to tell where the plot is going at any given moment, and as soon as you think you have it figured out, bam, it switches out the characters or the art style or the writing. The show likes to keep things fresh. The pilot episode is an hour and a half long and was shown in cinemas in Japan. I recommend giving it a whirl and trying to make it to the end of the first episode before you pass final judgment on whether you want to keep watching it or not. But man, right as I sat there stunned looking at Oshinoko and thinking how shocking it is for a show to be so beautiful and baffling, masterfully all over the place, cringe at times, yet ultimately worth it, experimental and artistic, yet narratively coherent, and yet impossible to describe, always such grade A badass soundtrack that will not leave my head, and how there has been nothing quite like it, nor will there be anytime soon, freaking Dandadan shows up and is like, bro, hold my socket. Dandadan exploded into the anime scene recently and is sending well-earned shockwaves throughout it. It is a beautiful storm of madness in the best way. If Oshinoko is a master ninja making careful, difficult-to-predict precision slices, Dandadan decides to just go on full-on berserk mode and throw a barrage of attacks at you from every direction all at once. And while the show is technically made of an endless chaotic barrage of beautifully animated and creative shonen battles, bizarre sci-fi, and Japanese folklore that would make Studio Ghibli blush, packaged as the action-packed hit of the summer, under all that, Dandadan is weirdly enough a rom-com. It stars Momo, a bratty but popular girl whose grandma is supposedly a psychic dealing with everything spiritual and occult, and Ken, an awkward nerd who's really into aliens. When they each find out about the other one, they're like, bro, you know that's all bullshit, right? Not like my thing. So they dare each other to go prove to each other that only their special interest is real when they find, ding ding ding, it's all of the above. What follows is an absolutely bonkers mad dash of some of the wildest plot points, animation, and direction choices I've ever seen in anime, which is not surprising when you consider this show was made by Studio Sarin Saru, which is run by my all-time favorite producer, Masaki Uasa. He didn't actually work on the show himself, but the studio seems to follow in his footsteps, so to speak. This is matched perfectly well with the insane story they're adapting that came to be when, after getting his series ideas rejected multiple times, Dandadan creator Yukinobu Tatsu almost gave up, but his editor, sensing his potential, encouraged him to just create freely and do whatever the fuck he wants. The result is Dandadan, a beautiful, colorful mess of exuberance and charm. Which, oh yeah, you know how I hyped up how this show has amazing battles and wild folklore? Forgot to mention, I don't give a shit about any of that. And even if, like me, the word shonen anime makes you groan internally and think this is one to avoid, I'd still give Dandadan a chance, because what draws me to Dandadan anyway is the pitch perfect chemistry that characters have in the show. Fuck, I could watch Momo and Ken reading a friggin' phone book and it would probably still be entertaining as all hell. The writing, the acting, the banter, the chemistry, the character animation on these two is not just chef's kiss, it's two chefs wildly going at it in what is clearly a violation of food health and safety regulations. It is rare for me to give a shit about the big shonen mainstream hit of the season, but when it's this freaking good, no wonder it's a hit. There was one action scene that basically made me just sit like this. Be sure to give it a whirl if you haven't already, but before you do, I should probably give you a content warning. Yes, just all the content warning, all of it. Yes, just for as fun and upbeat as a show as it usually is, it does have moments when it gets surprisingly dark or uncomfortable. But from what I hear, at least the anime gets less fanservice-y about it than the manga does. If you can stomach it though, I absolutely recommend Dandadan. Season 2 is scheduled to hit this summer. Before we move on from shows, I want to give some honorary mentions. Monkey Wrench is an indie animated sci-fi comedy show whose first couple of episodes have been pretty fun and funny and is available on YouTube. Lackadaisy is a different flavor of indie darling who I haven't tried yet, but it's an animated adaptation of a webcomic that's basically the Prohibition era except everyone's a cat. X-Men 97 is apparently a huge winner among my friends who were into the X-Men show back in the 90s, but I wasn't, so I can't really comment on that. Gentry Chow vs. the Underworld is a gorgeous looking show that my friend Alad is doing backflips over with a linear story, but 4 episodes in I still can't tell if I like it or not. Funnily enough, the same can be said for Interior Chinatown, which is a weird sort of meta show about what it's like being a secondary character in someone else's crime show, so while I'm still undecided on that one, I'll give it points for originality at least. I also want to shout out Silo, a show I know nothing about, but the buzz around the internet is comparing it to Severance, saying it scratches the same itch, so that's good enough to get on my radar. But now, it is on to movies. The first one chronologically that wowed me was Inside Out 2. I mean, is that really a surprise? It's a sequel to Inside Out, one of the best, most moving movies to come out of Pixar. Pixar, the studio known for making amazing, moving, top-tier Western animation. And the sequel somehow managed to match up to the original. I mean, sure, the original is always going to have points for being the original, and the second one maybe has 1 or 2 aspects where it is flawed, albeit still enjoyable, but at the end of the day, it is beautiful. It is moving. It shows things we're not used to seeing in media that's also aimed at kids, telling them about aspects of life usually deemed too adult, but in a way that's still engaging, entertaining, and gets the very important message across, even to kids, without being anything you wouldn't want your kids seeing. Pixar takes that act and makes it even more masterful by realizing how important their first movie was for people worldwide to understand and visualize their own mental health, and therefore making the choice to work with mental health care professionals while working on this new movie. And boy does it show. Whatever downsides the movie might have, which is mostly just all the secondary characters, they are very much made up for by its pitch-perfect portrayal of anxiety, taking it to levels I wasn't expecting. Instead of forgetting all about the lessons from the first movie of how every emotion serves a purpose, they jump right into what purpose this new character is meant to serve in Riley's head, how she differs from fear, and trying to understand her better. What follows is a truly incredible movie, and while the movie isn't flawless, for example, I think 3 of the 5 new characters barely served any real purpose, while the existing cast feels underutilized, we kind of ignore everything we learned from the first movie about how Riley's brain works to introduce completely different, contradictory mechanics, and the plot has just a few too many repeating plot points from the first one. At the end of the day, none of those were really all that hurtful to the movie, and a friend I watched it with remarked that if he had seen that movie a few years prior to that, it could have saved him a lot of money on therapy. And I get it. While there wasn't a bawl your eyes out moment like in the first one, I had a tear in the corner of my eye throughout the entire movie. It's a beautiful movie about anxiety, obsession, and things in real life not always being Hollywood pitch perfect, ironically. I was really happy to see this movie not only do well, but break box office records, because man, it deserved it. Although it came with a pretty big dark cloud attached. Every original movie Pixar has done in recent years has kind of been a flop in the box office, relatively speaking. We finally get a movie that's financially a success to incredible levels, and it's yet another sequel, guaranteeing us 7 more years of sequelitis, with more original ideas being tossed to the side so we can get, I don't know, a live-action remake of Ratatouille. Disney, that was a joke. Disney, put down the money. Disney! So right as I was bracing for a cold winter of more sequels and soulless reboots, in comes The Wild Robot. Probably the best thing to come out of DreamWorks in 2 years! Which doesn't sound like much, but holy shit, has this studio been on a freaking roll! Jokes aside though, I think this is maybe the best thing I've seen to come out of DreamWorks ever. And honestly, I think it sits among some of the best original concept animated movies from any large studio in the past decade. It tells the story of a helper robot who, due to a shipping mishap, accidentally winds up on a remote island with no one to help. So they decide to help the animals there, which is tough because they don't get nature. They end up in a sort of mother role to an egg. The following story is awesome, beautiful, hilarious, and moving in all the ways you'd expect from a really well-made, polished big studio movie, and the central story probably goes about what you'd predict. But what it adds on top of that really brings the movie to new heights are a few moments that left me and the friend I was watching it with our jaws actually physically hanging open in the theater, because we were just so shocked to see a family movie go where it went. It was the perfect spice to bring out this already exquisite dish. This movie talks about how nature can be both incredibly beautiful and absolutely harsh. It talks about family and what it means to be one, even when you're not perfectly aligned for each other or perfect at your role at it. It talks about sacrifices. One of my friends is still mad at me for telling him to go see this movie without warning him, because he was just in tears throughout the whole thing because of how good it was. My only real gripe with this movie that puts it at a 9 instead of a 10 is that I feel it puts aside some of its harsher lessons a little as the movie goes on, just so it can leave you with a good feeling overall. But man, this movie made me want to immediately go and give my mom a hug, which I did as soon as I saw her. Despite its quality, I was not expecting this movie to do well in the box office, since I felt it barely had any marketing, to the point where I almost didn't even realize it was out. And as I mentioned, new original stories don't do well in recent years compared to sequels and reboots. But to my delight, the movie was such an unexpected box office smash hit that a week after its release, DreamWorks already announced they will be adapting more books from the series it's based on into movies. A week! And while you could argue this is in itself a symptom of sequelitis, it also shows the big studios that a fantastic original film that's neither a sequel nor a reboot can still absolutely be a commercial success, and they're still worth investing in, thereby making The Wild Robot not just my favorite film of the year, but possibly the most important film of this year for the animation industry. Absolutely check it out if you haven't.
I was honestly kind of expecting either Inside Out 2 or Wild Robot to win all the awards this year when it came to animated movies, so imagine my surprise when it all went to Flow, a movie I heard little to nothing about. This was made extra surprising by the fact the graphics look like a PlayStation 2 game, which is weird because Stray, an actual PlayStation game about a cat from 2022, kinda looks way better. So I was pretty curious what made it so successful. Thankfully, because I was running late with this list, I had a chance to actually sit down and watch it to find out. And what can I say except it really fits this year's theme of stuff you can't really explain, especially without ruining it. But at its core, it's a wonderful, part fun, part somber adventure movie about a cat journeying through a beautiful natural environment. Impressively done with no speech throughout the whole thing. The animals in this movie act and communicate like animals. Mostly. The rare occasion when they don't is probably my biggest issue with this film. Then again, there's those videos of cats using buttons to talk, so I don't know. And either way, given how much of a non-issue it is, it just goes to show you what a good film it is. The graphics are a weak point here for sure, but given this isn't from Hollywood or Canada, this is from Latvia, I'll give it a pass, especially since everything else in this movie is absolutely wonderful. The story's interesting, the environment is engaging, and I really like some of the directing choices. Do I agree with the awards dubbing it Best Animated Movie of the Year? Maybe not, but it does deserve to be in the running, and when a tiny animated studio from Eastern Europe manages to rise up to even fight in the same ring as Pixar and DreamWorks, and actually manages to match up, you bet your ass it's worth celebrating and honoring, especially since once again this is an original concept from a lesser known source as opposed to a big budget sequel of a proven intellectual property. So I am very happy to see it get celebrated and recognized, and I do recommend sitting down to watch it. But yeah, speaking of stuff that are sequels to big beloved franchises, we sure had our fair share of big beloved live action movies making a comeback. There were so many long awaited sequels, starting with Dune, who I don't really remember? I mean, it came out in like February, but I think I had fun, and like I do remember some of the visuals looking cool, and my friends liked it, and I don't remember having issues with it.
But I mean, it's not the only new sequel to a beloved franchise we had this year. We also had Beetlejuice, who I enjoyed while I was physically in the cinema. It was only after I left the cinema and started really thinking about it that I realized how much that movie annoyed me because of many of the decisions it made. Like having 4 plots at the same time with only one of them actually going anywhere. The way they butchered Lydia's character and turned her from the biggest, baddest goth queen icon this side of the Addams family to a wet mop, or how they dedicated way too much screen time to one of the least likable characters I've seen in cinema that wasn't even enjoyably annoying like his predecessor Otto was, but rather just felt like a walking anti-woke cartoon. Or the way they explained the protagonist of the last movie being missing with a vague half-sentence hand wave that never gets brought up again, yet spent multiple fully animated and effects-filled scenes to explain why the dad from the first movie wasn't in this one, who, wow, great use of your screen time budget there, was really gonna miss that guy if they didn't spend half the movie hammering in just how not in the movie he was. It's not like you could have used that screen time to resolve 3 of the plots you spent the entire rest of the movie setting up, only to basically pull a lever and make them go away. Or how baffling it is to have all these mistakes in a movie that took 30 years to make, and so many other complaints that I felt so strongly about that I wrote an entire rant about it that I had to cut from this video because it was both too long and too negative for a best of list, which, but I mean, at least Catherine O'Hara is still the absolute gem she's always been, even if they flanderize her a little bit. But any moment when she's on screen, she is always fun. And I will say, one thing that makes me forgive this movie for its problems is that it's called Beetlejuice, implying the future existence of a Beetlejuice, a third movie in the series that could theoretically solve the issues of the second one, with Lydia regaining her old self back since she was called out on her change in-world, as well as resolving some of the plot lines that I think were solved a little too abruptly to be satisfying in any way. So if done right, a threequel to Beetlejuice could retroactively save the second one, and it's still better than the original idea for a Beetlejuice sequel from way back in the 80s, Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian. I'm not kidding, look it up. But okay, no, listen, there are still a lot of other long-awaited sequels this year, like Deadpool vs. Wolverine, who other people enjoyed. Somehow. Bafflingly. No, come on, we can't be this negative. There were so many sequels this year, surely something was good, right? Okay, how about... No, nope. What about... Oh, here we go! Wait, really? Twisters?
Twisters.
Figured it out?
Twisters.
This is a real low point. Yeah, this one hurts. Ow.
I'll be real, I love Twister. It was a formative movie for me, kickstarting my love of disaster movies as a kid when up to that point the craziest disaster movie I knew was Wizard of Oz. But let's be real, disaster movies don't have the best reputation. They are blockbuster schlock in the full sense of the word, and it just got worse as time went on, with modern disaster movies being high-calorie, low-nutrition movie junk food. So when I heard there was a limited-budget reboot sequel to Twister coming out 30 years after the original, while I was very excited and happy about it, I was not expecting much. I mean, this is the movie that kicked off Helen Hunt's career for Pete's sake, and has so many iconic moments, like the flying cow or that gaze up into the tornado, that were genre-defining. So with a no-name cast that has nothing to do with the original, and riding on the reboot trend that's considered box office safe, I knew there was no way the sequel was gonna match up. And maybe it's because my bar was set so low that the reboot floored me anyway. Like, on paper, nothing in this movie should have worked. It mostly takes scenes from the original and remixes them, giving them a different order, different context, or other slight changes that keep it the same as what we liked in the past, but with an update. But at the end of the day, someone in that production crew knew exactly what the hell they were doing, because despite all that, Twisters freaking works! I sat in that seat completely ready to rip into it with my friend in an empty movie theater, riffing on how schlocky it is. Instead, I found myself transported back to when I was 8 years old, staring up in awe as the movie weaved disaster movie magic at me. My side-mouth critique of how they're all just rehashing scenes from the original was quickly replaced with excitement at seeing how they'll reimagine or update a scene I love that I haven't seen yet. There was this one scene I was really looking forward to, where in the original, they don't realize how close the tornado really is until suddenly it's lit up by lightning, and I couldn't wait to see it recreated. And when it finally showed up, I just went, wow, out loud. Despite keeping a lot of plot points from the original, and I do mean a lot, it didn't completely feel like a rehash so much as it felt like when you hear a good remix or a cover of a favorite song, from an artist that knows what makes the original so good, which parts can be changed or updated while others should be emphasized for what they already are. I left the movie theater feeling like I did after watching Mortal Engines, thinking I loved it but it was probably gonna critically crash and burn. But to my surprise, other people actually agreed with me, with my YouTube being full of suggested videos titled "Twisters is good actually?" And while I still don't get quite how they did it, since a lot of it feels like it shouldn't work, at the end of the day, it was a blast and I'd love to rewatch it one day. Does it replace the original? No, but it doesn't feel like it was trying to so much as paying it a loving tribute, and for that, I think it's a success. That's it for good movies I've seen this year, though I do want to give a quick honorable mention to Borderlands for being a really enjoyable hate watch. If you're the sort of person who enjoys just ripping into a terrible movie, this is one of those that's really fun to sit there just baffled at how a movie this high budget ended up this bad. I could write a book about everything wrong with this movie. In fact, I did! My How to Draw Comics book specifically calls out multiple common mistakes you should avoid when writing a story. Mistakes that Borderlands definitely made. My book, for the record, is aimed at 12-year-olds, just to give you an idea of what to expect here. Having said that, that didn't stop the movie from being thoroughly enjoyable. What can I say? Sometimes a good hate watch is just the sort of mindless fun the doctor ordered. And usually this would be where I start talking about games, but since there's so many of them, I decided to make them into their own video. So instead, let's talk about the only new podcast I fell in love with this year. World Gone Wrong is a show hosted by Malik and Jamie, two friends/former roommates with a seriously funny and charming back and forth dynamic, deciding to just talk about everything that's gone kind of crazy in the world, keeping it light and fun while they talk about what it's like to still have to go to work, college, and keep up with responsibilities despite everything feeling like it's collapsing around you, because while the world can feel like it's crumbling and everything just keeps getting crazier, capitalism didn't get the memo and rent is due on the 1st, so you have to just kind of power through it and find joy where you can. But if that sounds a little too grim and depressing, keep in mind the societal collapse they're talking about is like werewolves and ghosts, body-snatching aliens, fairies, acid rain, and basically every storybook creature, cryptid, and catastrophe that just decide to gradually become real over the course of one really fucked up year that just keeps on rolling. Sounds familiar? Yeah, World Gone Wrong is an absolute masterpiece in that it uses a distinctly fictional, wacky setting to talk about something that actually feels extremely real and relevant to many of us, marrying mundane realism and strange fantasy in my favorite way, and presenting it all in a really fun, upbeat tone. Talking about issues from, if space and time warp, then there's now an extra hour in the day. Do I still have to work until 4? And if I do I get overtime? If I'm trying to report that there are now goblins on the train line I'm on, what do I put down when the reporting app asks me for an address for where this is happening? I mean, I'm on a train. And do the goblins count as cryptid, animal, or mythology related? Because I have to pick one from the drop-down menu. And is it okay to not feel okay? Which, warning, I'm about to get kind of real for a second. The show hit hardest for me when last July, while watching Infinity Train with friends, a drone attack crashed into my city block, blowing up right next door. So the next morning, when the initial shock was finally wearing down, I was sitting with my mom filling out a government form to reimburse us for our window that exploded, and trying to navigate the reporting app, asking, okay, so for the cause of damage, do we pick missile, terrorism, or other? She was like, it's a drone. And I was like, okay, but that's not an option. The options are missile, terrorism, or other. And she was like, but it's a drone. And I'm like, I know, but it's a drop-down menu. I gotta pick one. And we kind of went on a whole thing about it when suddenly at some point I just started laughing. So she started laughing because I just realized this is train goblins. This whole thing is so train goblins. And I could just feel the tension fading away because of the laughter. Here I am having just listened to that episode of World Gone Wrong when it fucking happens right outside my window. Or through, I guess. And thanks to World Gone Wrong, I was able to have a much needed laugh and a smile on my face in what would have otherwise been a very stressful time. And that's where World Gone Wrong shines. Our reality may be crazy, but World Gone Wrong is able to talk about it, including the heavier stuff, while remaining funny, upbeat, and that special kind of interesting that scripted fiction brings. I also like anything that really dives into the more realistic and mundane implications of really big fantastical things. Not to mention, the main two actors are so good at their roles that if it wasn't for the subject matter they're talking about, I would have a hard time believing this is even scripted. It's an absolute gem of a show, and I really, really recommend it.
That's it for podcasts. My song of the year is the entire Has-Been Hotel soundtrack. My snack of the year is Jolly Ranchers. My webtoon of the year is Poppy, the Girl Who Slept in 100 Years. And while I usually end these videos by talking about how the next year is going to bring so many unexpected surprises and good media, I don't have to be hypothetical. It's 2025 right now, and it is off to a bang already. I had to stop myself from talking about some of this year's amazing things in this list, and I mean, we're not even halfway through February, so I can only imagine how much more amazing media and experiences still await us. Don't forget, the best games of 2024 is going to be its own separate video coming, but until then, I've been Tomix, I currently am Tomix, and will hopefully continue to be Tomix, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!